Tyrannosaurus rex is one of the best-known dinosaurs to have ever walked the Earth. It is known to have been a ferocious predator, one which has been portrayed in many films and books. It stood 12 feet tall, 40 feet long, and weighed over 15,000 pounds, or 6.5 tons. But if Jurassic Park was to become a reality, and T-Rex DNA could help to recreate this awesome prehistoric giant, could it survive today? Of course, having a giant predatory carnivore roaming the planet would have severe consequences for mankind, other animals, and the ecosystem in which we live. But it's an interesting question. Could T-Rex survive today? To answer this question, we need to consider the dinosaur's habitat, diet, and climate in which it once thrived. Are any of these available today? T-Rex lived during the late Cretaceous period, 100 million years ago to 66 million years ago. T-Rex was alive during the dinosaurs' massive extinction event. Many other species of dinosaurs had died out before the mass extinction, caused by the devastation that followed a meteor strike on Earth. The world was a very different place back then. The continents we are familiar with today were making their way to their current location. Australia was still attached to Antarctica, and America was moving westwards, opening up the Atlantic Ocean. The climate was much warmer than it is today, but had cooled since the early Cretaceous. There were no polar ice sheets. Instead, Antarctica was covered in forests, where T-Rex and other dinosaurs could have roamed. Flowering plants were thriving, as were deciduous trees. T-Rex was largely dominant in the north. Their fossils have mostly been found in North America, whilst another meat-eating predator, the Spinosaurus, was more common in the south. Early birds and mammals were finding their place amongst the giants during this time too. The warmth that was evident during the Cretaceous period was due to large amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This greenhouse gas traps sunlight as heat, raising the temperature of the planet. The carbon dioxide came from the high volcanic activity at the time. Volcanic eruptions released large amounts of carbon dioxide. The decay of dead plants and erosion of carbonaceous rock also contributed to the large volumes of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. During the Cretaceous, places like Alaska were a warm 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. In Siberia, where today temperatures can drop as low as minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 60 degrees Celsius, it was much warmer. It ranged from 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius during the summer months to about 43 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees Celsius in the winter. It is thought that T-Rex preferred temperatures of 91 degrees Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius. Today, there are plenty of places that fall within the temperature ranges that T-Rex would have thrived in. Rainfall during the late Cretaceous was abundant in places like Alaska, where it was also warm. This is evidenced by wide tree rings and fossilized trees. It seems that the climate was drier towards the equator. The opposite is true today, where some of the wetter, hotter places are found nearer the equator. This implies that there are climatic conditions available on Earth today that would support T-Rex, but their geographical distribution may be different from the Cretaceous period. As well as the T-Rex's climate, we need to consider its habitat. Fossil evidence suggests that T-Rex was a versatile predator that was well adapted to living in a variety of habitats, from coastal plains and floodplains to forests and open grasslands. T-Rex fossils have been found in a range of different rock formations, including those associated with river and lake environments. This suggests that they may have hunted near water sources. T-Rex likely inhabited areas with abundant food sources, such as large herbivorous dinosaurs like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus. They may have also preferred areas with cover and shelter, such as forests, which would have provided hiding places for ambush-style hunting. Today, there may be far fewer wild areas available to T-Rex than there were over 65 million years ago, but the habitats that they lived in are still present on our planet, just covering a much smaller area. Finally, let's look at T-Rex's diet. We know that T-Rex was a carnivorous dinosaur. It is depicted in movies and books as a ferocious predator that killed everything in its path. But this wasn't necessarily true, and there is debate about where this meat came from. Some argue whether T-Rex was more of a scavenger or a hunter. This huge dinosaur likely did both, and even some evidence of cannibalism. Some scientists say that based on current-day predator-prey relationships in places like the Serengeti, when applied to T-Rexes, they are portrayed as predators like lions. But other researchers have argued that they likely spent a lot of their time scavenging like today's hyenas. This was concluded from the number of T-Rex fossils compared to its prey fossils. They were of roughly equal number. If T-Rex had been solely a predator, then you would expect there to be 3 or 4 times as many prey species within the same area. Either way, T-Rex was a formidable meat-eater and had an impressive bite force. From reconstructive models and predicting the mass of their jaw muscles, scientists believe that T-Rex had a bite force of 57,000 newtons. This is compared to just 300 newtons for the average human being, or 16,500 for crocodiles, which have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom today. T-Rex's 60 serrated teeth measure up to 8 inches, or 20 centimeters long, and its sheer size meant that it could take down most other dinosaurs. It needed to consume a lot of food to sustain its massive body. However, it is difficult to determine exactly how much T-Rex ate in a single feeding, or even over its lifetime. Based on comparisons with modern-day predators, scientists estimate that a fully grown T-Rex may have needed to consume around 300 pounds, or 140 kilograms of food per day to maintain its body weight. However, this is just an estimate, and T-Rex's feeding habits may have varied depending on factors such as the availability of prey and the season. Coprolites, or fossilized scat from T-Rexes, have been examined to determine not only what the dinosaurs ate, but what their digestion was like. In the case of T-Rexes, analysis of their feces, which measured 1.5 feet long, has revealed that they had a relatively quick digestion time and fast metabolism. This would have meant that they needed to eat regularly in order to survive. In comparison, today's largest reptile, the saltwater crocodile, needs to eat about 50 full meals a year. Prey species included grazing dinosaurs like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus. Today, some animals would be comparable in size. The African bush elephant would give Triceratops a run for its money regarding its size and weight. Whilst Triceratops weighed 5 to 6 tons and stood between 7 to 10 feet tall, the African elephant can weigh 4 to 6 tons and stand 10 to 13 feet tall. Edmontosaurus, though, would have dwarfed any African elephant. To survive, T-Rex would have to hunt a lot, with populations of today's large mammals, such as elephants and rhinos, often under threat from habitat loss, human interference, and poaching. The few that remain would be decimated by T-Rexes. Although the climate and habitat in some parts of the world appear favorable for the prehistoric giants, making sure there were enough prey species for them to hunt or scavenge would prove difficult. Their voracious appetite would wreak havoc on today's prey animals. There could also be other factors to consider when talking about diet, as mammals weren't on the menu for T-Rexes during the late Cretaceous period. Would their digestive systems adapt to consuming warm-blooded, furry prey? Today, many reptiles consume mammals and birds as well as fish, invertebrates, and other reptiles, so it probably wouldn't be an issue. But it is worth noting how different the ecology is today compared to 65 million years ago. The whole ecosystem and food chain have changed dramatically since dinosaurs ruled the Earth. If it were to be reincarnated, perhaps T-Rexes would be more suited to a zoo or park where their numbers could be limited and food sources maintained for their survival. Triceratops is one of the most iconic dinosaurs that ever lived, easily distinguishable by its 3 horns protruding from its face and a large bony neck frill behind the head. It roamed the Earth during the late Cretaceous period, 68 to 66 million years ago. It grew up to 9 meters, or 30 feet long, stood 2.5 meters, or 7.5 feet tall, and weighed up to 9 tons. To support the weight of the horns, their heads were enormous. The largest fossilized skull ever found measured around 2.5 meters, or just over 8 feet long. They were considered slow lumbering beasts that browsed and foraged vegetation and lived up to 70 years old. Here we ask the question, could Triceratops survive nowadays? The world has changed a lot in the past 60 or 70 million years. The climate during the late Cretaceous period was very different from today, and most of the animals that walk the Earth now didn't even exist back then. Triceratops was native to what is now North America. During the Cretaceous period, North America was split in half from the north to south by what is known as the Western Interior Seaway. This created two separate land masses, but the continent as a whole was moving northwest, towards its present-day position. The Rocky Mountains began to form, and near the end of the Cretaceous period, the Western Interior Seaway dried up and retreated. The two sides of North America were then joined by a coastal plain over what is now Montana. It was on this coastal plain that Triceratops was most common. But at the end of the Cretaceous, they, like 75% of all animal species, became extinct. Even though the world is now a very different place if Triceratops was reincarnated like the Jurassic Park dream, could they survive? Let's first look at the animal's diet and determine whether there would be food for it to eat in our modern world. We know that the Triceratops was a herbivore. It had a unique beak-like mouth, which is thought to have been used to grasp and pluck vegetation, rather than bite it. Once the leafy matter was inside of the animal's mouth, it had a huge number of teeth to grind it down. Some report up to 800 teeth, which were arranged in columns. Their teeth were continuously replaced throughout their lifetime as they were worn and ground down from their fibrous diet. The dentition of the Triceratops and the shape and structure of its mouth suggest that it ate vast quantities of vegetation, which is hardly surprising given the size of it. Due to the low hung and heavy head, it is believed that they would have eaten low-lying fibrous matter. Although, like elephants, they could have knocked over trees with their incredible strength to get the juiciest leaves on higher branches. As well as feeding on leafy forage, research suggests that they likely ate woody palms and cycads, as well as ferns. These plants were common during the early Cretaceous, but by the end of the period, the flowering plants were dominating, and there was a change to the ecosystem. Today, the types of vegetation that Triceratops fed on still exist. A lot of the plants died out, along with the animals during the mass extinction event, but it wasn't quite as catastrophic for the plants. They are harder than animals. They can regenerate when damaged, and they can regrow from the tiniest root or seed. Some seeds can lay dormant in the soil for years until conditions are right for them to grow. For these reasons, some of the plant species that were around during the time of the dinosaurs are still around today. But conditions are now very different across North America than they were 66 million years ago. Today, Montana does not have the likes of palm trees and cycads, which prefer a more tropical and subtropical environment. During the Cretaceous, temperate rainforests stretched northwards to the Arctic Circle. They had to contend with the extended periods of darkness during the winter months. But there was little to no ice or snow at the poles during that time. Today, the more tropical conditions that Triceratops was familiar with are found along the Gulf Coast, the lower Mississippi Valley, and South Atlantic states, and some parts of the Pacific Coast. The tropical regions include Hawaii and the Caribbean and Pacific territories. This leads us to talk about the climate Triceratops was used to. But in terms of food, we believe that enough tree species that were around 66 million years ago are around today and would be considered food for Triceratops, albeit in a more limited capacity. The Earth's climate was approximately 8 degrees Celsius warmer than it is nowadays. This was partly due to the shallower seas and partly the position of the continents, allowing for warm water to circulate and flow across the globe. Although some dinosaurs, like the mighty T-Rex, were warm-blooded like modern birds, many were cold-blooded like today's reptiles. One such cold-blooded dinosaur was the Triceratops. For cold-blooded animals, climate is everything. They obtain their heat from the sun and surrounding environment, and so this tends to affect their behavior. Triceratops may have migrated to warmer climes during the winter, or spent time out in the open, basking in the sunshine like modern-day reptiles to maintain their core body temperature. In the northern hemisphere during the Cretaceous, summers were warm and winters were wet. The average temperature over summer would have been around 27 degrees Celsius, about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The winters would have dipped to around 15 degrees Celsius, or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Summer temperatures could have exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, or 104 degrees Fahrenheit regularly. North America, although it can get hot in some of the southern states, does not have the climate it once did. We do not know how adaptable Triceratops was, or would be if it was reintroduced to the modern world. Temperatures did fluctuate seasonally back then, and the cold-blooded dinosaurs probably migrated accordingly. But there may be too much of a difference for them to survive today. But the climate isn't just about temperature. The atmosphere was different during the Cretaceous period too. It is thought that there was 4 times as much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than at the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1900s. This was a good thing for the plants and consequently for the plant-eating dinosaurs like Triceratops. Furthermore, the organisms alive during the Cretaceous were adapted to that environment. They found a way to survive. For example, they likely had much more efficient cardiovascular systems to cope with the lower oxygen levels and higher concentrations of carbon dioxide than is around today. Triceratops may struggle nowadays in a new atmospheric environment. But what about predators? Would they be too big to have to worry about being attacked by any of today's carnivores? North America certainly has its fair share of land predators, from mountain lions and coyotes to bears and wolves. During the Cretaceous period, Triceratops was alive at the same time as T-Rex. It would likely have fallen prey to this enormous predatory carnivore and would have fought to the death if attacked. Fossil evidence has found T-Rex tooth marks on the horns of a Triceratops, which then healed, showing that the Triceratops wasn't eaten on that occasion and must have fought back. But other fossils have shown large gouges on Triceratops's bones. These gouges match the teeth of the T-Rex, providing evidence that they were eaten by them. Smaller predators like velociraptors were also around during the late Cretaceous. Although they have been depicted in films as hunting in packs, this doesn't seem to be the case. Therefore, they were likely too small to be able to hunt Triceratops on their own. But hunting in packs would be a technique that would be deployed by modern predators such as wolves if Triceratops was introduced to North America. By biting at the legs of animals until they grow tired and weak, wolves can take down much larger prey than themselves. However, during the Cretaceous period, most other dinosaurs gave Triceratops a wide berth. With their horns, which could grow as long as 1 meter or 3.3 feet, were lethal. The skeletal neck frill protects its massive body from a head-on attack, and its sheer size was intimidating. Not only that, but it is now believed that Triceratops moved in herds for at least some of the time. This would have made them even more difficult to hunt and would have provided them with greater protection. Although the Triceratops seems to have been a robust dinosaur, we don't believe it could survive today. So much has changed over the last 66 million years. They evolved and adapted to a completely different climate. The differences in climatic conditions would likely have consequences that we have not gone through, such as their rate of metabolism or the chemical composition of the plants they ate. There are places on Earth that would be warm enough for them, and there are places that would provide enough food. But the atmospheric conditions would have had too great an impact, as would the ecosystem surrounding them. The Spinosaurus was a dinosaur that roamed the Earth almost 100 million years ago. It was a fearsome-looking beast and thought to be the longest-known carnivore the world has ever seen. It weighed up to 8 tons and grew up to 14 meters or 46 feet long. Its sharp teeth filled its narrow, crocodile-like head, and along its back was a long sail or spine. Bony protrusions from its spine pointed upwards, more than 1.6 meters or 5 feet long. These were thought to be joined together by skin, creating a sail that ran the length of its back. Although some scientists believe it was covered in a layer of fat, much like that of a camel's hump, rather than skin. Spinosaurus likely walked on its hind legs with 2 shorter front legs, in a similar stance to the well-known T-Rex. However, it may have also walked on all 4s on occasion. Its body ended in a long tail which had a flattened, paddle-like structure, thought to help propel the dinosaur through the water. Scientists believe that this dinosaur was semi-aquatic, with the ability to dive below the water's surface to catch its prey. The Spinosaurus became extinct around 90 million years ago. But if it was resurrected, could it survive today? A lot has changed over the past 100 million years or so, and the world which Spinosaurus lived in was very different from today. Even so, if we look at the dinosaur's diet, habitat, and the environment it was used to, then we can determine whether it would survive nowadays. Firstly, diet. Scientists believe that Spinosaurus fed primarily on fish. Partially digested fish scales have been found in the stomach region of fossilized remains of Spinosaurus. There has been debate as to the use of Spinosaurus's large dorsal sail, but some speculate that it may have been used in capturing its prey. In a similar way to today's sailfish, Spinosaurus may have used its sail to herd schools of fish into a tight ball before capturing them in their jaws. It may have used its tail to thrash at the fish, temporarily stunning them, much as thresher sharks do. The sail would have acted like a centerboard to counteract the sideways motion of the tail as it thrashed about. The Spinosaurus was a generalist and opportunistic predator. Although it largely ate fish, it also predated on other small and medium-sized animals. A Spinosaurus tooth was found embedded in a Pterosaurus's bone, suggesting that they may have eaten these flying reptiles as well. Its semi-aquatic lifestyle lent itself to hunting in freshwater, swamps, and possibly even coastal regions. The size and shape of the snout meant that it may have extensive sensory capabilities, allowing it to detect movement within the water, perhaps whilst its body remained submerged and concealed. Some studies have found their bones to be dense, which would help them to swim underwater in pursuit of prey. But some believe that Spinosaurus was much more of a land hunter, only hunting in the shadows or on the water's surface. Its lung placement likely meant that it could not dive or submerge itself like the crocodiles. These two contrasting views are widely debated. However, whether it was more of a land hunter or a water hunter, the semi-aquatic Spinosaurus had lightning-fast jaw speed, capable of snapping its jaws shut around its prey rather than slowly crushing it. If it was alive today, it would probably occupy a similar niche to today's crocodiles and alligators. It may even compete with them for space, territory, and food. Just as crocodiles eat fish, small mammals, and reptiles, such as turtles, Spinosaurus would do the same. Aquatic life during the Cretaceous period was thriving. In the oceans, Mosasaurus, Plesiosaurs, and modern-day sharks appeared. Less is known about the freshwater habitats, but fish were likely to have been abundant. No one knows how much Spinosaurus ate, but with such a huge body size, it may have needed to hunt large prey, and often. Crocodiles can go months without feeding, but when they eat, they can consume as much as half their body weight in one sitting. It's probable that Spinosaurus preyed upon huge freshwater fish found in its river ecosystems. However, there may not be enough food for a population of Spinosaurus to thrive in today's world. Overfishing and pollution of our waterways are decimating fish populations and have a knock-on effect throughout the food chain. Furthermore, more than half of today's crocodilians are under threat of extinction due to loss of habitat, hunting, bycatch and fishing gear, and damming of rivers. So, food may not be available for Spinosaurus to thrive today. But what about other aspects of life? Let's consider the Spinosaurus's habitat and the climate in which it lived. Understanding this could help us determine whether it could survive on Earth today. Most fossilized evidence of Spinosaurus comes from what is now northern Africa, mostly Egypt and Morocco. It lived on tidal flats, amongst mangrove swamps, and alongside inland lakes and rivers. The temperature of the Earth was a lot hotter during the late Cretaceous than it is today. During the hottest times of the year, rivers and lakes would have dried up. Spinosaurus would have changed its hunting strategy to take down land-based prey during these times. By the end of the Cretaceous period, most of today's continents had split away and were in a similar position that they're in today. There were high rates of seafloor spreading, which resulted in a large amount of volcanism. This created a warmer and more humid environment than today, with very few ice sheets and glaciers at the poles, except on high mountains. The formation of mid-oceanic ridges caused the sea levels to rise by as much as 250 meters higher than they are today. Temperate conditions extended to the poles, and much of the north was under a tropical and subtropical climate. There would likely be some suitable waterways around today for Spinosaurus to inhabit. They may compete with crocodiles in North Africa for territory, though. The Nile crocodile is the largest in Africa and is found in the Nile throughout Egypt. But it would be no match for the enormous Spinosaurus. Fish stocks would take a hit if a large predator was introduced to the ecosystem. There has been speculation about the Spinosaurus's fin-shaped dorsal spine. As previously mentioned, it may have been used in hunting within the water, but it also could have been used as an elaborate display for mating rites. Others have suggested that it could have been used to help with thermoregulation, By increasing the surface area, it would have allowed more heat to dissipate, cooling the animal down. Or it could have been used to absorb more heat in cooler temperatures. If it was used to regulate the body temperature, then it could be assumed that the dinosaur could survive in a range of temperatures. However, we don't believe the climate would be suitable. The late Cretaceous was considerably warmer than it is today. There was little difference between annual seasons, and the environment was much more humid. There was more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, as it was released from weathered Carboniferous rock, creating a greenhouse effect. Fossils have revealed wide tree rings near northern latitudes and a high density of tree cover. Alaska had vast swamps, and winter temperatures in Siberia's Arctic Circle got as low as 6 degrees Celsius, compared to -37 today. Where there are currently barren snowfields and tundra in Siberia, there was plant life for much of the year throughout the Cretaceous. All this evidence suggests that the conditions near the poles were warmer and wetter. Nearer to the equator, conifers were suggesting the equator was drier. These conditions are opposite from today. Placental mammals evolved during the late Cretaceous, ready to take over the planet after the dinosaurs' imminent extinction. But Spinosaurus became extinct before the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. In fact, about 30 million years before T-Rex existed. It is believed that Spinosaurus died out due to extreme drought because they were so reliant on water and swamps for their survival. With such a difference in climate, and possibly not enough food to eat, we don't believe Spinosaurus could survive nowadays. The Earth's climate has been through so many cycles and variations over the millennia that animals have adapted to the era in which they evolved. Only some species, like some crocodilians and some sharks, have miraculously survived relatively unchanged for tens of millions of years, which is a remarkable feat for any animal. Allosaurus was a large theropod dinosaur that roamed the Earth 155 to 145 million years ago during the late Jurassic period. Like most theropods, Allosaurus walked on 2 powerful hind legs and had shortened forelimbs like the well-known T-Rex. Some specimens have been found to be as much as 9.7 meters, or 32 feet long. They were ferocious carnivores with large heads and jaws full of sharp teeth. Although some believe that a real-life Jurassic Park would be an incredible sight, here we ask the question, could Allosaurus survive nowadays? Firstly, let's consider diet. Owing to their enormous size, scientists believe that Allosaurus hunted large prey. There has been solid evidence of this from the fossilized remains of both Allosaurs and herbivorous prey species. One injury that has been preserved through time was a puncture wound found on the Allosaurus, made by the tail spike of a Stegosaurus. Defending themselves against these predators was common, and another Stegosaurus skeleton showed a U-shaped chunk taken out of its neck, which fitted the size and shape of an Allosaurus snout. It seems the Allosaurus considered the highly armored Stegosaurus as common prey. There is debate about exactly how Allosaurus hunted. They are known to have eaten sauropods, which include the largest terrestrial animals ever to have walked the Earth. Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus belonged to this group, which had characteristically long necks, allowing them to eat from the very tops of trees. Although Allosaurus was an enormous predator, it was still dwarfed by some of these sauropods. Therefore, to hunt a full-grown adult may have required pack-hunting behavior. Their jaws were thought to possess stretchy ligaments, enabling them to open their mouths at a 92-degree angle. They could have closed them around the necks of their prey, similarly crushing the trachea of some of today's big cats. However, their teeth were small, unlike other theropods, suggesting they used them more like a saw, rather than crushing through muscle and bone. The sharp teeth would have delivered significant injuries, which the prey animal later succumbed to, similar to today's Komodo dragons. This would mean that Allosaurs wouldn't need to latch onto a large animal like Diplodocus to bring it down. Instead, their bites would inflict wounds that would weaken the animal, and they could track it until it eventually died. Also, their jaws weren't as powerful as the mighty T-Rex, but they had considerably more control over their heads and mouths due to their strong neck muscles. They would have eaten carrion too, but rather than shaking their heads from side to side like T-Rex and modern-day crocodiles to rip meat from a carcass, they would have pulled the flesh upwards like falcons. Their forelimbs seemed to be more useful than those of other theropods. They could use them to hold down the dead animal, whilst they ripped the meat off the bone with their jaws. But what would Allosaurus eat in today's modern world? The largest land animal alive today is the African bush elephant. It stands at 4 or 5 meters tall and weighs up to 6 tons. In comparison, Stegosaurus measured 3 to 4 meters tall and weighed between 3 and 5 tons. They are comparable by size, and elephants would likely be far easier to target than the heavy armored Stegosaurus. Also on the list of the largest modern animals are rhinos, hippos, giraffes, bears, and gaur. Although these wouldn't match the likes of Stegosaurus, and certainly not Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus for size, they may provide some nourishment for allosaurs in today's world. Whether these would be enough, especially considering many of these animals have small population sizes and are under threat of extinction themselves, is another question. Did Allosaurus eat the entire carcass of a sauropod? Or did it just hunt the larger dinosaurs because they were less agile than the smaller species? It is estimated that the top speed of Allosaurus was between 19 and 34 miles per hour. The top speed of elephants is 25 miles per hour, and for rhinos it is 31 miles per hour. This is considerably faster than Stegosaurus, which had a top speed of 11 miles per hour. Maybe today's modern species would be too fast for Allosaurus. If Allosaurus did hunt in packs during the Jurassic, then they wouldn't necessarily need to in modern times, as they would dwarf any of today's creatures. But it may be a way of targeting faster animals, using collaborative hunting to approach the prey from different angles. There is still some debate regarding the social structure and potential group hunting behavior of Allosaurus. Fossilized remains, particularly shed teeth found in carcasses, suggest that Allosaurus killed its prey and then brought it back to its lair to feed its young. Some believe that they cared for their young until they were fully independent. Others lean towards a more solitary existence for the allosaurs. It is relatively rare for large vertebrates to hunt together. Although some will tolerate each other when it comes to scavenging a carcass, many interactions amongst carnivores of the same species are aggressive and territorial. Although modern prey would be easier for Allosaurus to capture, we don't think it would be sufficient to sustain their appetite. But what about the habitat that Allosaurus lived in? Most of the Allosaurus fossils have been located in Western America and Portugal. The Morrison Formation is a layer of sedimentary rock that covers Western America from Montana to New Mexico. Contained within it are copious amounts of fossils, which provide insight into the plant and animal life during the Jurassic. The habitat in which Allosaurus lived was semi-arid, with distinct wet and dry seasons. There was plant life in the form of conifers, ferns, mosses, and cycads. There were rivers lining these forests and flat open floodplains in which the Allosaurus could hunt. Fellow theropods that shared this habitat with Allosaurus included Ceratosaurus and Torvosaurus. These were physically shorter than Allosaurus and more agile. They preferred hunting amongst the forests and underbrush, whilst Allosaurus preferred the open plains. Today, there would likely be some habitat that the Allosaurus would find suitable. There are open plains across most of the continents, which would allow the enormous predator to locate its prey. If introduced to these ecosystems, however, and if it somehow survived on the meager food sources available, it would probably decimate the species that live there. During the Jurassic period, Allosaurus was at the top of the food chain, but would occasionally have been predated on by other large theropods. There is fossil evidence of allosaurs being eaten by other theropods, but it has been suggested that this was mostly through scavenging, rather than actively hunting the dinosaurs. Today, no other animal would challenge the Allosaurus, and their presence could be devastating. Could they survive the climate in our modern world? Evidence shows that the Jurassic period was warmer than today by as much as 5 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius. There were no ice caps at the poles, and the temperate regions would have been more like subtropical and tropical climates. Regions closer to the equator were arid, whilst higher latitudes were wetter. Some of the land was covered in vast swamps and wetlands, creating a humid environment in which Allosaurus thrived. The diversity of ferns, palms, and conifers suggests that the climate was warm and humid, and their spread towards the poles shows that there was less of a temperature difference between the polar regions and those near the equator. In contrast, today's temperatures are significantly cooler, and there is an obvious temperature gradient along the latitudes. The oceans were thought to be 8 degrees Celsius warmer than modern times, allowing corals to thrive 10 degrees latitude further north and south from where they are today. Although there may have been some snow following intermittent cold snaps in the climate, the summers were too warm to allow glaciers to form, except perhaps high up on the mountains. The atmospheric carbon dioxide was 4 times greater than it is today. This caused a greenhouse effect, which bathed the globe in a warmer climate. The animal life on Earth would have been adapted to survive and thrive in these levels of carbon dioxide. If Allosaurus were introduced to today's world, then they may not survive the differences in atmospheric gases. In conclusion, we don't believe that Allosaurus could survive nowadays. The world is a very different place from the Jurassic period. Not only has the climate changed dramatically, but we believe the Allosaurus would struggle to find enough prey of a suitable size to survive. Pterosaurs were flying reptiles. They have often been called dinosaurs in the past, but this is untrue. They were related to dinosaurs, but weren't technically dinosaurs, as they evolved on a separate branch of the evolutionary reptile tree. After insects, they were the second group of animals to have evolved the use of powered flight, flapping their wings to propel them in the air, rather than just gliding or leaping from a height. They were a diverse group of reptiles. Some were as large as a fighter jet, and others as small as a paper airplane. Wingspans ranged from 25 centimeters, or 10 inches, to 11 meters, or 36 feet. The success of this group of animals is shown by the length of the time they existed on the planet. They spanned most of the Mesozoic era, which encompassed the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods from 228 to 66 million years ago. You would be forgiven for believing that today's birds descended from pterosaurs, as they shared similar behavior. However, despite living during the period and taking to the skies, modern-day birds did not descend from pterosaurs. Instead, they evolved from terrestrial, feathered dinosaurs. Today we ask the question, could pterosaurs survive nowadays? Firstly, let's look at the pterosaurs in a bit more detail to find out if they could survive on today's planet. The pterosaurs can be split into 2 distinct groups. The basal pterosaurs were the more primitive type of flying reptile. They were the first to appear during the late Triassic and were relatively small compared to their giant descendants. The wingspans of these smaller pterosaurs generally did not exceed 2.5 meters. These wings comprised a membrane that connected their hind legs to an extensively long fourth finger on their forelimbs. Because of this membrane, it used to be thought that they were poor at moving along the ground. However, new evidence in the form of fossilized footprints or tracks has revealed that these flying reptiles were good at walking and may have even chased after small animals along the ground when hunting for food. They walked efficiently on all fours despite their back legs being hampered by the membrane that formed their wings. They had claws which would have made them expert climbers, and it is believed that they may have spent a significant amount of time in trees when they weren't flying. These smaller basal pterosaurs had long tails and teeth inside their mouths. They were expert flyers and caught insects on the wing, as well as small vertebrates, which they plucked from the ground as they swooped down low. Some of the larger basal pterosaurs had needle-like teeth, which helped them grip onto the fish they caught from the sea. Others were specialists in eating beetles, and some behaved like today's insectivorous bats, flitting through the darkness of night and catching an array of insects in the air. Most of these primitive pterosaurs, however, had become extinct by the end of the Jurassic period, but the larger species were thriving and dominated the skies. These more advanced pterosaurs were called pterodactyloids and evolved to be very large. The largest known was called Quetzalcoatlus. It stood at 3.6 meters, or 12 feet tall, and had a wingspan of 12 meters, or 40 feet. It was the largest animal ever to grace the skies. These larger pterosaurs developed toothless jaws, short tails, and well-developed crests on their heads, which they used for display purposes. The diets of these flying reptiles appeared to be enormously varied. Many of the larger specimens were thought to have been mostly piscivorous, diving into the water to catch fish. However, recent analysis on teeth microwear shows that some species primarily fed on carrion and terrestrial vertebrates. By studying the shape of the pterosaurs' beaks and the structure of their wings, scientists have been able to determine the specialized diet for some of the more advanced pterodactylids. Those with shorter, more robust wings were fish eaters and able to dive or swim underwater to catch their prey. Some were dip feeders, like today's frigate birds. Others were more like cormorants and dived into fresh water. And others, like gannets, were plunge divers, dropping from a great height and plunging below the surface of the ocean in the pursuit of fish. Other piscivorous pterosaurs included Pterodastro, which was a filter feeder like today's flamingos. It used its tiny teeth to sift out small invertebrates from the shallow water. The non-piscivorous pterosaurs were also adapted to consume a variety of different foods. Some were omnivorous and supplemented seeds and berries with insects flying through the air. Others had powerful jaws and bite forces, which allowed them to crack open mollusks or capture medium-sized dinosaurs. And some, called Asdarchidae, were like today's ground hornbills and storks, meaning the ground for any terrestrial vertebrate that they could swallow whole. Looking at the pterosaurs' diets and feeding techniques, they are so similar to some of today's birds that it's hard to imagine them struggling to find food nowadays. Although there would inevitably be competition from today's birds that have filled those niches, we believe that based on diet alone, pterosaurs could survive nowadays. But what about the habitat and climate they were used to? The Mesozoic era, during which the pterosaurs lived, was a period of huge geological change. The supercontinent Pangaea broke up, splitting into the continents we are familiar with today. There was a huge amount of seafloor spreading, which altered the sea levels. This had a knock-on effect, changing the climate of the Earth's land masses. The deserts that once covered a large area in the center of Pangaea retreated, and greenery spread across the land. Humidity increased as the sea levels rose and surrounded more of the land. There were a few plants that we are familiar with today. The grasses only emerged towards the end of the era, and the landscape was mostly dominated by non-flowering plants, such as conifers and cycads. However, being omnivorous, carnivorous, and piscivorous, the pterosaurs would find the small vertebrates, flying insects, and fish that they used to feed on still around today. They would have been used to a much warmer climate, however. The external temperature may have been essential in their flying activities, which could mean today's lower temperatures would be prohibitive. But living nearer the equator and in some of today's hotter countries may enable them to survive. There is also the question of oxygen. Conflicting studies surround the debate regarding the atmosphere during the Mesozoic. Some suggest that there were lower levels of oxygen, whilst others suggest oxygen concentrations were higher than today. Being adapted to a higher oxygen environment would make moving to lower levels difficult to cope with. But if the reverse is true, the pterosaurs, being used to less oxygen, could thrive in the higher oxygen levels of today. So in conclusion, we believe that pterosaurs could survive today, as long as they could find their own niche in the right climate. There would be no doubt that introducing pterosaurs into today's ecosystem would cause a stir. Although many of the pterosaur species seem like they would fit into the niches occupied by today's birds, they would bring a whole other level of competition. Those relying solely on fish for their diet would, like many of today's seabirds, face dwindling fish stocks, marine pollution, and conflict with humans. The smaller, more primitive species may survive on insects like some of today's bat species, and others could hunt small vertebrates in the warmer parts of the world. So, why did pterosaurs become extinct in the first place, especially whilst the flying dinosaurs, known to us as birds, survived? Recent evidence suggests that pterosaurs were, in fact, doing quite well towards the end of the Cretaceous period. Just before the mass extinction of the dinosaurs, their numbers weren't dwindling as was first thought. Instead, they were thriving. But when the meteor hit, they too met their doom. Scientists now believe that this could have been due to their size. Although pterosaurs began their evolutionary journey as small, bird-sized reptiles, these died out before the end of the Mesozoic, and the later species grew into enormous reptiles. Even the smallest of these had wingspans over 2 meters or 6 feet. During the mass extinction, only the small animals survived, Nothing over 25 kilograms or 55 pounds made it past the Cretaceous period. Birds, in comparison to pterosaurs, were very small. Their size was likely inhibited by the presence and competition from the pterosaurs. This means that the pterosaurs inadvertently caused the birds to survive mass extinction where they themselves could not. Furthermore, birds could rely on plant life to survive, while pterosaurs needed to hunt to eat. It is incredible to think that today's birds have survived since the Mesozoic era and even made it through the mass extinction when some of Earth's most fearsome predators could not. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also leave a comment with what you would like to see in the following videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.